Hello and welcome to Storyboard. We are breaking away from our usual format because we have some unusual content. When we were invited to interview Nikesh Arora, the Senior Vice President and Chief Business Officer of Google, we thought the conversation with him called for more than just a segment. And because we wanted to get as much juice out of the interview as we could, we called for reinforcements in the form of Durga Raghunath, Vice President, Products and Executive News Producer of firstpost.com, who lives and breathes Google. Here's that conversation. So to begin with, I'm trying to look at things from the marketer's point of view. And just when they think they know everything that the internet has to sort of teach them and ready for the next step, you come out, you as in the internet or Google, with something new, and you're going to start all over again, and you suddenly feel like an idiot, you know nothing.
I think there's a broader point you brought up, which is interesting, is that the one thing which is constant in the story is change. And I think before we think about marketing, you have to look at consumers and what consumers are doing. And I think in that regard, India we could learn a lot from what's happening in different parts of the world. I was in Korea last week, in the US. There are things happening with consumers which are very interesting. So if you look at consumers today, they pretty much live their life on their mobile devices.
Sure.
As opposed to sitting and watching TV. I grew up here, and I'm sure you did. And you look forward to that 2 hours in the evening where you could watch TV, and it was compact programming, not 500 channels, and you knew there were 2 channels that you had to watch. And today, I can't keep track of the number of applications my 16-year-old uses, and every time, she said something interesting to me the other day. She's like, Dad, email is for formal communication.
Right.
So the perspectives of consumers have changed. And I think the fundamental task of any marketeer is to relate to consumers. Okay. So they have to be where the consumers are.
Interesting point about mobile. I think it was I think when you were talking to ATD earlier, perhaps this year, you sort of made a statement where you said, we limit ourselves by calling mobile mobile.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And I would love to hear more about what you mean when you say that.
One of the fascinating things that has happened as technology's evolved is we have been dealing with devices in isolation. And that made sense a few years ago when your television was your television and it never talked to your computer, and your computer was your computer, and your phone was your phone, and then none of these things talk to each other. Now today, if you think about it, you're slowly beginning to see devices talk to each other. So I can go collect my music on my PC off the internet, and I can use my phone to play it. Now suddenly your phone is starting to talk to your PC. There's many applications which I'm sure you use on your PC and on your phone. And if you see, there are instances where people have put their televisions online as well, where I can take a YouTube video and play it on my television. So you're beginning to see devices talk. When devices talk, I think what happens in the future is you have a multitude of screens around you. You'll have your watch could be a screen, your TV could be a screen, your tablet, your computer, your phone. All these are screens. And over time, services are going to become the thing that you want to use across all these screens. Right. So the mobile becomes a context. It becomes your sort of geospatial context. You're saying, oh, I happen to be home, I happen to be at work, I happen to be at dinner with my friends, I happen to be sitting waiting for somebody in a meeting. And if you think about that, you can think about use cases that you would use. If I'm sitting waiting for somebody in the meeting, I'm more likely to read First Post or the newspaper or something else. If I am sitting at home waiting for something or sitting at home, I might watch a video. If I'm at work, I might search for something, I might do something else. So suddenly what happens is your where you are becomes your context, and that sort of becomes your screen of choice. So it's no longer mobile. So you say, oh, when I'm mobile, I'll always use my mobile screen. Well, what if I use my tablet? What if I have my computer with me with Wi-Fi? So suddenly when I'm mobile, I can actually have access to multiple screens. As long as my screen knows where I am, it can be more useful to me.
The consumer is constantly faced with making choices, right? I'm moving, perhaps, desktop is becoming almost passé. You have a tablet, you're moving to your mobile phone. A lot of us have completely deserted even a laptop, right, for various reasons. And this is hard for the advertiser, right? We have readers who are, moving from a website classic format to the tablet format to the mobile format. And each, in a way, is, in terms of the old rules of impact, probably diminishing in terms of strength, okay? So again, these are old rules.
I could argue all these things with you because...
For advertising to remain hugely powerful, right, on digital, right, across these devices, how would you approach dealing with multiple devices, multiple attention, consumption patterns?
I think that there's lots of interesting places we could take this to. But I think if let's talk about two or three different things. First, let's talk about content and making money. So if you look at historically, as you've seen changes in media, there's typically been two or three ways money has been made by advertisers. That content has been funded, right? If there was newspapers, it's a combination of advertising and subscription. Some people pay some money and some advertising comes in. That's how a newspaper makes money. That's how television makes money, right? There's a combination of some function of cable fees versus advertising on television, and there are some channels which don't take advertising, you have to pay more. So somewhere in that spectrum or continuum, you pay for content or content gets monetized by advertising.
Sure.
And that's still true in any media that you can come up with. Content will get paid for because consumers interact with content. And it's going to get paid for either directly by the consumer or the consumers will not want to pay, but they're willing to take advertising instead.
Right.
And the question is, what form does that advertising take on when you start interacting with a smaller screen or different sizes and different contexts? And I think there what becomes very important is, I think the big transitional shift in advertising is going to be, in the past you had very little idea on who the user is or was. Take a newspaper. You have no idea who's reading the newspaper. You can make up demographics of who the newspaper reader is. Television. You kind of know there are households involved. There's some agents, there's some third-party measurement services which will go figure out based on household samples who's watching it, but you really didn't know. But if you take look at today's technology, you have a reasonably good idea of who that person is.
Sure.
You have a lot more data about them because of the applications they interact with or what they do. You have a lot more data about their physical context. You have a lot more data about their social context. And that makes advertising, I think, 3 to 5 times more powerful. So I think the big challenge for advertisers or marketeers is how do you leverage the information that you have about individuals and how do you go from a mass market broadcast type advertising concept to a more personalized, more individualized concept of advertising, because if it's very useful for me, I'm willing to accept it if it's interesting, and probably you'll end up making more money.
In India, especially more than other markets, we've shifted from being a hugely under-measured market, say 2002, 2003, to today. Now you've got data coming to you
Out of years.
Out of years.
Exactly, out of years,
now,
yes.
when you have your meetings with marketers or advertising people, do you think they are up to speed with these changes? Do they understand? For example, nobody understood data 10 years ago.
Right, fair enough.
And today they're forced to, or they miss the boat.
Well, I think that's a good question. I think if you think about, in every business there are people at each end of the spectrum. And in our business too, there are people at the end of the spectrum where they understand it as well as us, in some cases probably better than us, because they have other data in addition to a data they get from us or interact with us. And there are people who still haven't gotten sort of the hang of it. I think it's fair to say people who operate only in the digital space have a very clear idea about data because that's their livelihood. They have no other choice, right? If they don't understand the data about their consumers, they're not going to be able to make their services interesting or their advertising interesting. And I think it's if you step back and think, it's pretty much the travel sector, because a lot of travel purchasing of tickets happens on the web now around the world. So they totally understand the data, they get it, they run analytics, they understand how every small change in their website impacts their revenue. They understand how every act of advertising impacts their revenue because they can control and watch and study. The spectrum changes as you go further down. And I think CPG is probably more towards the end of the spectrum because CPG is still physical things we all consume, we buy. There's broadcast, mass market, tremendous amounts of advertising. And traditionally, CPG has never had a direct relationship with the consumer because you always went to a retailer to go buy CPG goods. But I think that's going to change as well.
So this, there's always this 10% ceiling, right, that everyone talks about in terms of, you take marketing spends or ad spends. Digital always, 5 years ago, you had to fight to get digital as part of the conversation. Now everyone says, sure, this much is for digital, right? But still that proportion is fairly small, right? In terms of when you look at
you mean in the Indian context?
In the Indian context, right? And sometimes you hear it in the West too, right?
No, that's not true. I mean, in places in Europe, we're up at 25-30%. So I think, to your point, it's no longer part of a why. It's how, and how do I get it beyond.
So what do you think makes one, move beyond that 10%?
Consumers.
Okay.
I mean, look, again, this is not the cart and horse problem. What comes first? It's definitely the consumers, because if everybody in this country was not watching television and spent their entire life on tablets and mobile phones, you would have no spend on television. So if you think about it that way, you come back. And I believe that, in time, it may take slightly longer in India because of infrastructure reasons, but yeah, our TVs are going to be connected. When our TVs are connected, there's no choice to do,
Right.
there's no point doing
Do you
broadcast.
feel that that is sort of the next breakthrough in terms of internet through television and?
Well, again, it's sort of like mobility. I have a peeve about internet. Look, the internet is purely a communication mechanism. It's a large pipe coming to your house which can send you individual content. That's what the internet is. A television is an efficient form of broadcast using a bandwidth in such a way that it gets the same content to everyone at the same time in a cheap way. But if I could make sure that you could get a large pipe coming to your house
Right.
and you can get a lot of content on it, then you'd prefer the customized content. Do you really want to watch that movie at 9 o'clock with 40 million people in the country at the same time? So we are all in sort of, I want it now, I want it at this time, I want it when I want it. So we're all turning into a sort of a set of people who want instant gratification.
When you look at the TrueView experiment, right, when now as a marketer I have the ability to choose a certain format, I can spread money across 5 ads, I can see which is doing better.
Right.
Do you see advertisers and marketers sort of embracing that, or do you feel that, sometimes too much innovation is something that people find intimidating?
Oh, I think we don't have enough innovation at all.
Right.
I think we're still in the early years, probably in sort of the infant years of advertising in the digital space in terms of the change you're about to see. So I don't think, to your point, if only 10% is moved after all the efforts in the last 7 or 8 years, we still have 90% to go. I used this example in the past somewhere, and if you think about when the transition happened from radio to television, the last big transition was radio to television. All the advertising spend was on radio, and suddenly you have this thing where you can see people. So the first TV ad was a Barbie ad where a man was moving a doll with his hand in the back, and they ran the radio jingle. So we already have the audio,
Right.
let's create video
Right.
that goes with the audio.
Right.
And today we do the same thing. We say, we need advertising on the internet, let's do something. If we already have the video, let's put it on the internet. So people take ads made for television, put them on the internet.
Yeah. So you think part of the problem is it's not yet digital led in terms of finding exciting breakthrough formats or ways of thinking in terms of interactivity?
Fascinating things happen when you take away crutches, when you take away legacy. When you have legacy, you live in the comfort of legacy, and you talk about change as innovation. When you have no legacy, you have no crutches, then change is evolution. Change doesn't come, you have to lead it. So in terms of the opportunity and not the problem, the opportunity is that there's going to be phenomenal opportunity for people to innovate in this space because there is a change in consumer behavior. So I think advertising will follow that change in consumer behavior. Some people will try and lead it, some people will follow. I think the winners are going to be the ones who lead it.
What are the big opportunities that we in India are not seeing on the internet?
Well, I think it goes back to the consumer problem, right? I just drove here, my phone dropped multiple times.
Right.
That happens in other parts of the world as well, but we are a technologically savvy society in India. If you look at the age demographics around the world, India has one of the most favorable age demographics in the world in terms of young population, and I think we're going to have the largest youth population in the world in the next many years. So if that's true, they're very technologically savvy, they're right up there. What we need is to make sure there's enough infrastructure to support the aspirations of all these people. Because if there's infrastructure, there's no reason that 300 million, 400 million people, 500 million people should be watching stuff on their phones, should be using broadband at home. So we have the ability, we have the consumer demand. I think what we need to do is create the supply. Right. And if that infrastructure gets fixed, I think all these problems or these opportunities open themselves up.
Right.
I think what's sort of strangling or gatekeeping all this innovation is the lack of infrastructure.
When I look at Google, right, from the time that I wake till the time that I go to sleep, there are so many products
We're
that
working
sort
on
of
stuff that while you're asleep as well.
Even
So,
then, yeah.
we don't like the fact that you
Scary,
have 12
yeah.
hours of your life where you're not interacting
Thank
with
God,
us.
Nikesh, at least those 6 hours. Anyway, I'm just wondering, as a larger company, right, you definitely, I'm sure, are conscious of the fact that you are, in a way, a gateway to the internet. And what does that mean for Google?
Well, I think it's fair to say, I'll rephrase your statement. I do believe that a lot of people use a lot of Google services, and yes, we have the ability to shape certain behaviors, to be fair. But I think, so it comes with a responsibility. But at the same time, I think don't underestimate the fickleness of consumers' minds and the ease of them going to the next new thing. I mean, look, in the last 8 years I've been around at Google, the next new thing has always been something else. And you had YouTube, thankfully we own it.
Right.
You have Facebook, you have Twitter, you have all these apps on their phone. So people keep moving to the next new thing. And you have to make sure that you stay on top of your game and stay on top of your toes to keep engaging with the consumer. So it's a challenge in itself, because it's not something you can sit back and say, great, consumers are coming to me and I have no problem, I just have to shape their mind. Actually, no, they will go away if you're not doing what they expect you to do. So I think it's sort of a double-edged sword. It does come with a responsibility to make sure that you can be trusted and people trust that whatever you're doing makes sense. But in a way, if you think about it, I was trying to think about parallels to your question in terms of who else has social responsibility. I think the pharma companies, right? Every time somebody eats some medicine somewhere, they're expecting to get well, and failure is not an option, right? So they have a huge responsibility, but they seem to deliver on it because they have great processes. They take it very seriously, and failure is not an option. I think we have the same thing. They create trust. We have to create trust, and we have trust. Hopefully, I mean, as I travel around the world, I do notice that consumers do trust the Google brand, and they rely on Google for a lot of their key services. And I think part of it is that symbiotic relationship. We have to create great products for the consumers and make sure we never destroy the trust they have in us. At the same time, hopefully, consumers will continue to find Google products great and convenient and keep coming to us.
In India, by and large, your branding is, say, trade-centric, not so consumer-facing.
Yes.
Most of what you do.
Yes.
So why is that? Well, abroad, certainly in the West, you do a lot of consumer-facing advertising. And
There are two different points here, right? One is the notion of consumer-facing branding in itself.
Right.
How much do you do and how much should you do? And the second question is, Google specific in terms of why do we spend more money in certain parts of the world versus the other parts of the world? I think the second is more for tactical reasons, depending on the state of the evolution of the market, how much money do we want to spend in the market, and what's happening. So if infrastructure was going gangbusters in this country, I might spend more money to try and keep the consumers engaged with our brand. But we don't seem to have issues where consumers are not choosing our services in this market,
Right.
so we don't have to go spend that money. But I think there's another broader point there, is that, remember, our services are services which are on the web, are digital, so consumers can interact with them right away. So, for us, it makes a lot of sense to target the consumers who are in the space where we want them to be.
Right, they want to
Right,
be
so
there.
it's very hard to sell Google search to somebody who doesn't have a phone, a computer, or a laptop,
Right.
or tablet.
Sure.
So I want to be where they are online, right? So there's a prerequisite, and I'm in my space. So I think we try and concentrate our branding in areas where we can address the consumers, which is mostly in the digital space. But there are some times where, for competition reasons, for reasons of brand awareness, for certain markets where we've been late on our services, we have to go rely on traditional consumer media, which we do.
Here in India specifically, I'm going back to sort of a rider to an earlier question of mine. I spend an extraordinary amount of time with CEOs of advertising agencies and media agencies, trying to understand whether they're getting digital.
Right.
Or getting
So what's your assessment?
Very tough. I mean, as in, they all...
The assessment is tough, or
No,
them
they're
getting
broken
digital
in the
is tough?
dark. They don't understand enough. And I've repeatedly got the sense that the medium, the publishers or whatever, are not doing enough to educate them on what's happening.
I'll tell you what, there are some very savvy publishers in this market.
Sure. But no, I'm talking the big ones, big creative agencies. I mean, there's an overlap now. Somehow it became only digital agencies and media agencies who got digital, and the creative agencies didn't.
Right.
And I was talking to your colleague this morning, and he was saying the number one film on YouTube for last month was the Lifebuoy film, which was created completely by a creative agency. The media agency had nothing to do with it.
Fair enough.
However, the media agencies, the creative agencies, a lot of them just don't get.
That's a very good insight. See, I think that challenge is not specific to India.
No,
I think we're
okay.
noticing that around the world. And if you think about it, the first wave of digital advertising has been a wave of what we call performance advertising, which is I want more people in my store, I want more clicks, I want more people to buy my goods and services, my tickets, my products on the internet. And it's very measurable, to your earlier point, which is I spend money, I see how many clicks I get, I see how many convert into orders, I therefore understand the ROI of my spend. And that's what people have been doing from an advertising point of view. But I think what is beginning to happen is that you're saying, wait a minute, this is not a phenomena that goes away. This is where consumers are spending more and more time. So I need to figure out how they start engaging with my brand and learning about my brand. Now, brand engagement is not about saying click here to buy something cheap, or click here to come to my store, or click here to play a game. Brand engagement is about getting people excited about your brand, getting them to understand the brand attributes, the brand values, which is sort of your example as a Lifebuoy film, because I'm sure that video is an expression of Lifebuoy's brand and trying to get consumers to engage with that brand and watch it. And that happens not at the media buying end, it happens in the creative agency end.
Right.
So given that digital media is not as homogeneous as TV, where TV is a slot, you understand TV. Digital media could be a social networking site, could be a search engine, could be YouTube, could be context aware. So suddenly, when you're a creative guy, you have to start thinking about, for example, there's a car company which has customize your own car campaign, which people engage with. That's a way of engaging with my brand. You can design your car to some degree, and every car is an individual expression of yourself. Now that requires the creative guy to think right off the beginning, should I put that into a search campaign with Google, drive them to a website, have a YouTube video that hangs off it, and maybe create a community on Twitter to engage with all of this stuff, or Google+. Right? So that requires a whole different thought process in the creative process, as opposed to saying, let me star two very big Bollywood actors and actresses into a video and have them run around and make a video with my car.
When you look at monetization, right?
Yes.
There is a point in the product cycle when you say, okay, this is
time
a good
to make money.
Time to make money,
All right.
Enough
That's
of
my
that.
job.
But
That's what I have to do, yes.
I know you take that call on various products across Google. So tell us a little bit about, if there's a broad philosophy about approaching different kinds of products. If something as innovative as Google Glass, that's never been done before.
Yes.
And then there are, there's the regional market in India, for instance, which requires a lot of patience, right? So how do you weigh some of these things?
Well, I think it's fair to say that when you live in Silicon Valley, you learn a few things. And my learning has been that companies have to lead with products. Because users buy products, they don't buy companies, they don't buy monetization. Users buy products. Whether you're a hardware company, whether you're a software business, users engage with your product. So your product has to be good, and users have to like your product. If, for example, you build a beautiful product, price it right, do the right marketing for it, nobody buys it, all the other stuff is to waste. So our point of view is, let's create great products, let's get users to use them. As users use them, we'll figure out how that product is evolving, where there is an opportunity to make money or not. And there are products where, for example, Google Search was being developed by Larry and Sergey for 3 or 4 years before they had the first advertiser on there. And they spent the first 4 years getting a lot more users excited about the product and them using it. Google Maps, we spent lots and lots of money, many, many years, and people are using them. We like the fact that they're using them. We're slowly working on monetizing. So it's been 5 to 7 years before we started thinking about making money on those things. But we're pretty sure that it's an unequivocal success. YouTube, we bought it for the first 3 or 4 years. We didn't have any advertising sales focus on it. We just made sure that YouTube had the right infrastructure, people would use it, we had the right content on it, and now I think it's the second largest search engine in the world. Now we can spend our time making lots of monetization attempts on it, work with Lifebuoy and put their videos up there, and hopefully with every brand in the world. So we take a more long-term view on when we're going to make money. We go with the notion of creating a great product and getting a lot of consumers to access that product. Billion is a good start. When you get 1 billion people around the world, you make $1 from each of them, you make $1 billion.
Right.
You get 10 million users, you have to make a lot of money from 10 million users to make $1 billion. So I think that's the philosophy. We want a lot of users. We want to figure out ways which are interesting. Once you have those users, how you make money with those users. But that's not the primary focus. That's not where we start, which makes my job somewhat hard. But that's the fun of it.
Okay. Yeah. Again, last question. So,
sure.
So have you tried on Google Glass? Do you own Google Glass?
I have one right here. Yes,
you
I have.
You do?
Yes.
So I mean, tell us a little bit. You have to walk us through this.
Can you walk us through?
Yes.
I can walk you through. Look, at the end of the day, what's fascinating is that our founders, Larry has a point of view which I fully subscribe to, which is called think 10x as opposed to 10%. The idea being that if you think about some radical way of changing things where you want 1,000% improvement on them, so 10 times the improvement, you're more likely to innovate. There's going to be a lot less people working on it, so therefore you have a chance of success. And you aim for 10, you end up at 3x or 4x, that's a pretty good start. Because if you only try and improve something by 10%, you end up at 3%, which is not very exciting.
Sure.
So I think part of it was a challenge to see how can we get all that computing into a form factor that can sit above your eye, and it could be useful. And I think what's fascinating is that as has been publicly seen, that device now probably has as much computing and processing capability as the first PC XT or PC ATI used to program on 20 years ago, and maybe even more, probably more from a processing power perspective. But it has a camera, it has the ability to let me see my email, my text, and I think the plan right now is to give away, sell a few thousand of those to get people who are wanting to develop on that platform to come with interesting ways of using it, because we can think of a few ways, right, but really want to see how the creativity of lots and lots of people is unleashed. It has a camera, it has computing, it has display capabilities, and it sits right above my eye, so it's not distracting. But I'm just to think of the possibilities. That camera can be used in multiple ways to recognize things in the long term. The camera can be used to give you a perspective of a person. Interesting examples of surgeons wearing them while there is an expert somewhere else out. There's somebody in the field and he's got a Google Glass, and you can see him operating, and there's somebody out in the field who's guiding him through a voice interface. So there's so many, once you create a platform, you create that opportunity. There's so many ways you could use that. And I think that creativity is yet to be unleashed on that device, but I think it's going to be interesting. The good news is it's definitely going to change something.
Well, thank you, Durga, for helping me with this one. Thank you, Nikesh, for making the time. And after we finish with this interview, we can see the Google Glass. That'd be fantastic.
It's always fun to be in India and talk to people. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.